worst floods in memory struck Invercargill and parts of rural Southland on Friday, 27th of January 1984. The disaster was foreshadowed by a National Weather Office report 2 days earlier. Heavy rain was likely for 24 to 48 hours, possibly over the whole South Island. The weather map for the next day, Thursday, 26th of January, showed a cold front was stationary over Southland and not expected to move for 18 hours. Torrential rain fell during that Thursday, and by nightfall, all Southland rivers were in high flood. In the following days, an estimated 5,000 people were forced to leave their homes. Flooding caused evacuations at Tuatapere, Otautau, Thornbury and Riverton, as well as Invercargill. Flooding was extensive in Invercargill, especially in the northern suburbs of Grasmere and Waikiwi. A state of local civil defence emergency was declared at 0400 hours on Friday, 27th of January, and extended to cover the Southland region at 1000 hours the same day. The scenes that follow were compiled from television news coverage of the emergency. They raise a number of points for later discussion, especially the question of replacing civil defence people in critical positions before they become too tired or overstressed.
More than 500 people have been evacuated from their homes in the Invercargill area, and hundreds more have been forced out of their homes in Otautau and Tuatapere in western Southland. Preparations for the emergency started on Wednesday when heavy rain started falling. Civil defence staff were assembled last night, the state of emergency declared at 4 o'clock this morning. Drains and sewers couldn't cope with the deluge, and water started running along city streets and into adjoining properties. Added to the problem, local streams burst their banks, putting parts of Invercargill under several metres of water. Late this morning, rain started to ease and it looked as if floodwaters would drop, but rivers continued to rise and the situation further deteriorated. There were more evacuations when the Otapuni stream, which flows through the centre of the city, flooded. Early this afternoon, the Waihopai River on the northern outskirts of the city breached its stop banks, and families were evacuated from about 300 houses in Gladstone by trucks and helicopters. Water from the Waihopai also flooded an industrial area. Evacuation tenders were set up in 2 schools and in the Invercargill Scottish Hall, and some families are staying with friends. Police, firemen and army personnel were flown to Invercargill today to boost local emergency services. Transport was severely disrupted. Floodwaters soon forced traffic off city streets, and roads throughout Southland were also cut. The province's only link with the outside world was by air. In one 24-hour period, 80 millimetres, that's about 3 1/4 inches of rain fell in Invercargill. The forecast is for further showers near the coast, but the weather should clear inland.
We've had people who've arrived with the children who have been just scooped up out of the water before they got washed away. And we've been amazed at the neighbours and their cooperation and the enthusiasm for helping people.
like look after all your needs,
We've all taken by truck here, and it was very well organised, very good.
It's been hit a couple of days though.
Oh yes, I'm a bit worried.
Police and army reinforcements were conspicuous today at roadblocks, cutting off evacuated areas from sightseers and from householders wanting to return home unless they had civil defence clearance. Much man-cars needed for security alone. Although some suburbs are dry now, the problems are live electricity and disease from sewerage. No one's allowed home until that's been inspected. Welfare officers dealing with evacuees say the impact of what Southlanders have lost is only now sinking in. Tasks like jet boating bread to Otatara keep hundreds busy yet. That'll be days yet for Invercargill's airport, accessible now only by boat. Nobody's predicting how long it'll take to pump out. Air New Zealand is busing passengers to and from Dunedin, and that's affected 1,000 people's flights this weekend alone.
Problem too, these motors.
People have been tremendous, really, with people we never expect would come in and help us.
If you go down to your houses with the inspectors and stand outside the front gate, and they'll go in with you one at a time. Okay. Anyone in Dudley, and there's two from Ross, if they wouldn't mind coming with me,
For these residents of the suburb of Waikiwi, it was the first time they'd been allowed home since floodwaters swept down the Waihopai River on Friday and forced them from their homes. In other parts of the city where the water has receded and electricity and drainage have been inspected, evacuees have returned home to clean up. But in this area, where 600 homes were evacuated and several hundred are still underwater, residents were allowed in only to collect possessions. They saw for the first time what the floodwaters had done to their homes. Some evacuees are reportedly angry at not being allowed to return home. To answer their criticism, civil defence authorities are holding a public meeting in Waikiwi tonight. Welfare services are now in full swing, providing food, clothing and counselling. It's been a bewildering experience for all.
What sort of personal problems are confronting you and having to be settled?
Personal problems, well, most of them is lack of contact with the rest of the family, and we're very concerned over that. And some of them is the feeding of pets and that, because we have a pet patrol, and they're ringing in, wanting their pets fed, if possible, if we can find them.
For residents in the Grassmere Waikiwi district, their homecoming means facing a massive clean-up. About 360 families have been allowed to reoccupy their homes, and today they face mud-laden carpets and sodden walls with the fire brigade's assistance. Although some of the furniture can be dried and salvaged, badly damaged belongings can only be dumped. A group of 12 families in one street who'd stayed on were evacuated today because of the problems caused by the backup of sewage in a higher part of the suburb. Civil defence authorities have set up a centre to keep residents informed on the reason for their decisions and how residents will be affected. But not everyone's happy with the way civil defence is operating.
what they haven't impressed on people is that people from the lower part here are moved up there. They're living 10 to 12 to a house, and of course it's doubling up on sewage, which is pushing it all back into their own homes and the places down the bottom here.
I'm not angry now. I was very angry yesterday. They mucked us around something awful. We came up, they told us to go away, we came back, they told us we needed permits, we got permits, we came back, and then they told us they weren't letting us go down anyhow. You know, the police have been okay, the army have been okay, but some of the people at civil defence, you know, just don't know what they're doing. I'm not doubting the ones at the top do, but some of the ones running around.
Helen and husband Peter have waited anxiously all week to be allowed to return home to see what havoc the flood caused.
Look at the sofa here. Apparently we're coming to the toilet. The
One of the worst clean-up jobs is getting rid of rotten food. In most of the houses, the power's been off since last Friday. Local freezing workers have been helping residents clean out their freezers and take food away to be buried at the tip. Civil defence authorities have now lifted restrictions on people returning home, although in many cases their houses are still far from habitable. Late today, the authorities decided to keep the state of emergency in force in Invercargill and parts of rural Southland until everyone's housed properly again.
How many people are you sending out this morning?
Quite honestly, I'm not sure. We think we've got about 150 here this morning, plus there are maybe another 600 already out all over the province, working at the moment, making their own way independently.
What sort of jobs are they having to do?
In most cases, we're going into houses in the newly opened up areas of Grassmere. Some of them are going out to industrial areas, helping clean up there, but they're really scattered all over the place.
And what's been their response to this?
Oh, tremendous. You can see them this morning, they're here willing to get their sleeves rolled up and their lunches hopefully today, and they're willing to work.
An area of the survey that probably hasn't been done yet.
Yes.
And that is to try and find out from you some of your needs in your home since the flood.
Oh, yes, yes.
You're Mrs. Hodkinson.
Yes.
And you're living at 19 Buller Street.
Many Southlanders have learnt the hard way the value of knowing the civil defence instructions on emergency evacuation printed in their telephone book. Civil Defence Headquarters, the emphasis is on morale, getting people adequately housed and trying to keep their spirits up.
They understand the water back, but when the water has dropped in some of the houses, they will not accept the fact that because of health reasons they can't go back. And some of them are very angry, and that is becoming a very big problem.
When a disaster like the Southland Flood hits the headlines, the media understandably rush to those who suffer from the physical scars caused by that disaster. This was no exception. The plight of those driven from their homes who lost property and stock or suffered severe farming damage, all this was highlighted in newspapers, on radio and television. Any disaster invariably brings a community closer together. People do get together in times of need. They help their neighbour. Once again, these aspects of the flood have been highlighted. But what about the group of people behind the scenes who mastermind the safety and then the restoration of the community? Those who even suffer criticism from some quarters of the stricken population, the civil defence.
Once the state of emergency was announced, just how long did it take to get the operation going?
Well, when I was over the police station there with the controller and the mayor and the district commander of police, and when Tommy said to me, he said, "Righto, Bill, get your operations room going." She was operational within half an hour.
From that moment onwards, an estimated 400 volunteers swept into action, working around the clock during those frantic few days of the flood. And no one worked harder than those at the Civil Defence headquarters in the Civic Administration Building. Take 17-year-old Tanya Bell, for instance.
Phil put on the request on the radio then, okay?
She worked on rescue missions in the field, and when a shift was finished, she'd man a communications radio in the headquarters for another 12 hours, working around the clock for those in need. She'd been just a tiny cog in a big wheel, but was an inspiration to those above her who undertook similar hours. Bill Early estimated that he only slept 12 or 13 hours during the first 8 or 9 days of the disaster. Welfare officer Anne Stoddard was another who shunned sleep night after night.
You can have a railway house that comes to see you this morning. It's nearly lunchtime. As long as it comes to see you for the next 2 or 3 hours.
Key personnel in civil defence were overworked during this disaster, and they must be fully alert at all times to make crucial decisions. It's a problem which local bodies must overcome before the next emergency. Invercargill Civil Defence Controller Jim Brooks.
It's to try and train people to take their place. We're very fortunate in the control side that we have 2 alternate controllers, and they took over at peak times, and that'd be wonderful. But in the other sections, it definitely needs trained persons to take over.
Somebody's got to carry on, and what I'm trying to build up is a team of people that could step into an operations room and take over. They can take over on the welfare, the communications, the rescue, and this is what we need. 8 hours, let's face it, we've been going, what now, 9 days, I think, from memory, something like that, and we're only human beings.
I understand that you had almost some sort of premonition about the flood, and that you prepared a report on what might happen just a matter of weeks beforehand.
On October, sometime 23rd, I think it was, I wrote to the catchment board and asked them to prepare me a map of the low-lying areas of Invercargill that could create a civil defence emergency. Right? They produced this map. And I got it on November the 29th, I think it was. I had my Christmas break. I started on it then. We had a look at the big aerial photos. We counted up there was 1,205 houses. I had a look at the statistics for Southland, and I estimate to be round about 5,000 evacuees. Okay, how do you feel? What they would feel when they hear that rain thundering down? Is it on again? This is going to be our problem. I feel it's a long-term problems people are going to face, and we have got to support those people right through for, I'd say, months.